Now the story of Joseph and his brothers, which takes us from Israel to the land of Egypt. Joseph was the son of Jacob, grandson of Isaac, and great-grandson of Abraham. He was born in Israel some 200 years after the birth of Abraham, but his adventures took him south on a perilous journey to Egypt. Unlike Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Joseph never talks directly with God, but instead receives the Lord's messages through dreams, which were in those days considered divine communications. The story is an exciting tale of Joseph the dreamer, of Joseph of the splendid coat, how Joseph's brothers wanted to murder him and then sold him into slavery, and how Joseph survived and eventually became, other than the Pharaoh, the most powerful man in Egypt. When Joseph was 17, he was still living with his father Jacob and his 11 brothers. As you remember, Jacob had 12 sons, 6 by his first wife Leah, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. 2 sons by Leah's maid Zilpah, Gad, and Asher. And 2 sons were by his second wife Rachel's maid Bilhah, Dan, and Naphtali. After years of not having children of her own, Rachel, Jacob's first love, gave birth to Joseph, who became his favorite. Benjamin, his 12th son, was born later. One day, when Joseph returned from the fields, he reported to his father that his brothers had been doing evil things, which only fanned the fire of their jealousy. Except for Benjamin, the brothers already disliked Joseph because he was their father's favorite son. To symbolize his favored position in the family, Jacob had made Joseph a beautiful coat of long sleeves, the coat of many colors. In such a coat, Joseph could not do manual labor as his brothers did. They wore only the drab, sleeveless coats of common shepherds, while Joseph's long coat was a constant reminder that their father loved Joseph more than he did them. Their dislike grew to hatred. Throughout history, Joseph has been referred to as the dreamer, and dreams in those ancient biblical times had far more significance than they do today. Many people believed it was one important way in which the supernatural world communicated with us, a way that God talked to people. This was extremely important in the life of Joseph. One day, he was out in the field with his brothers when he had a dream. In Genesis 37:6, he told his brothers,
"Listen to this dream that I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright. Then your sheaves gathered round it and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, 'Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us?' And so they also despised him, because of his dreams and his words."
Then Joseph had another dream in which his brothers all bowed down to him. And when he told it to them, their hatred grew to rage. So it was that when they were out tending the flock one morning, and they saw Joseph approaching in his elegant coat, they said, "Let's kill him and get rid of him once and for all." But Reuben, the eldest brother, argued, "No, let's not kill him. Shed no blood. Why don't we just throw him into this dry well here in the wilderness?" Reuben's plan was that when the brothers had all gone, he would come back and rescue Joseph and return him to his father. So that's what they did. They grabbed Joseph and tore off his coat and threw him down the deep pit. Sometime later, when Reuben was away, the other brothers saw a caravan of Ishmaelites approaching. And Judah said, "What's the profit in slaying our brother? After all, he's our own flesh. Why don't we just sell him to the Ishmaelites?" They all agreed and hauled Joseph out of the well and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Then they decided to cover up their crime by killing a goat and dipping Joseph's beautiful coat in the blood to make it look as though Joseph had been killed by a wild animal.
זאת מצאנו. הכרנה, הכתונת בן ההיא אם לא.
When the brothers showed the bloody coat to Jacob, he was convinced that his beloved Joseph had been devoured by a wild beast. As the Bible tells us in Genesis 37:34.
Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. Thus his father wept for him.
What Jacob did not know, however, was that Joseph was not dead. The Ishmaelites had taken him down into Egypt and sold him to Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard, to be a slave in his house. God, however, continued to watch over Joseph, as we learn from Genesis 39:2.
The Lord was with Joseph, and his masters saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and he made him overseer of his house, and put him in charge of all that he had. The Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing was upon all that he had in house and field. Now Joseph was handsome and good-looking, and after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But Joseph refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, with me here my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything he has in my hand. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except yourself, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great wickedness and sin against God?"
But Potiphar's wife kept after him day after day. He tried his best to ignore her, not to speak to her. One day, however, when he was in the house working and there was no one else around, she caught him and held on to his garment and commanded him once again to come lie with her. He tore away from her and fled, leaving his garment in her hand. Potiphar's wife was furious with Joseph's rejection, and she was determined to punish him. She screamed for help. "See, my husband has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. He came in and tried to lie with me, and when I screamed, he fled, but he left his garment behind." She told Potiphar the same story when he came home, and Potiphar became enraged. He called his men and threw Joseph into the great prison where Pharaoh's prisoners were held. And there Joseph stayed, but he was not alone. The Lord was with him, as we are told in Genesis 39:21.
The Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. He gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's care all the prisoners who were in prison, and whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The chief jailer paid no heed to anything that was in Joseph's care, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper.
Sometime after this, 2 new prisoners arrived. One was the chief cupbearer of the Pharaoh, and the other was his chief baker. They had somehow angered the king, and he had sent them to prison. They had been turned over to Joseph, who was charged with taking care of them because they were important officers. One night, both of these new prisoners had troubling dreams, all the more troubling since dreams were considered messages from God. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were upset and asked them why they looked so downcast. They told him that they had dreams, but they had no one to interpret them. And Joseph told them, with God's help, he would interpret their dreams. The chief cupbearer told him that he had dreamed of a vine with 3 branches, and that the branches blossomed and then ripened into clusters of grapes. He said that Pharaoh's cup was in his hand, and that he took the grapes and pressed them into the cup and gave it to Pharaoh. Then Joseph told them that the vines meant 3 days, and that within 3 days he would be restored to his former position as chief cupbearer. And Joseph said, "When they release you, please remember me. Mention me to Pharaoh, and try to get me out of here, for I have done nothing that they should keep me in this dungeon." When the chief baker heard the favorable interpretation of the cupbearer's dream, he was eager to tell his own dream. In his dream, there were 3 cake baskets on his head, and the top one was full of all sorts of baked goods for Pharaoh. But the birds came along and ate them. And Joseph said, "This is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you." 3 days later, it was Pharaoh's birthday, and he made a great feast for all his servants. The chief cupbearer and the chief baker were brought out of prison and knelt before him. He restored the chief cupbearer to his former position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But as Joseph had predicted, he condemned the chief baker to death, and the birds gathered to eat his flesh. Joseph, meanwhile, remained in prison. The cupbearer had forgotten Joseph's request. One night, 2 years later, Pharaoh had a dream which awakened him. But he went back to sleep. that same night, he had a second dream. In the morning, the two dreams troubled him so much, he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt to explain what the dreams had meant. But none of them could interpret the dreams. It was then that the chief cupbearer remembered Joseph. He told Pharaoh about the young Hebrew slave in prison who could interpret dreams. Pharaoh sent for Joseph. And when Joseph appeared before him, Pharaoh said, "I hear you can interpret dreams." Joseph again explained that his power to interpret dreams came from the Lord. "It is not I," he said. "God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." Then Pharaoh said, "I dreamed I was standing on the banks of the Nile and saw 7 sleek fat cows grazing on the reeds, and 7 gaunt, thin, starving cows came up and ate the 7 fat cows. In my second dream I saw 7 ears of grain, full and good, growing on one stalk, and 7 ears withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind, sprouting after them, and the thin ears swallowed up the good ears." And Joseph explained, "Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. There are 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten. The famine will consume the land, and the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about." Then Joseph told Pharaoh that he should appoint a wise and discreet man and make him overseer of all the land. This man would have the power to take 1/5 of all the grain during the 7 years of plenty and stockpile it to be used during the 7 years of famine. Pharaoh thought that would be a good idea, and he also believed that Joseph was the perfect man for the job. He took off his signet ring and placed it on Joseph's finger. And he gave him Asenath, the daughter of a high priest, to be his wife. Joseph was 30 years old, and at that time, with the exception of Pharaoh himself, there was no one in Egypt more powerful. As it happened, events turned out exactly as Joseph had foreseen. In the next 7 years, there was a bountiful harvest every year, and the granaries were full to overflowing, as the Bible says, full beyond measure, thanks to the foresight and diligence of Joseph. So also was Joseph's life full beyond measure. He had gained great prestige, great wealth, and Asenath had given birth to 2 sons. Joseph, however, took no credit for his great success. In Genesis 41:51, Joseph says,
God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. God has made me fruitful in the land of my misfortunes.
And then, as Joseph had predicted, after 7 years of plenty, there then came 7 years of famine, not just in Egypt, but throughout the world. Joseph continued to be in charge, and oversaw the distribution of grain to the starving people. Not only was there enough grain for the Egyptians, but there was enough to be sold to other people as well. As the Bible says, all the earth came to buy grain from Joseph. Including, of course, Joseph's brothers. When Joseph's father Jacob heard that there was grain to be had in Egypt, he sent his 10 oldest sons down there to buy it, for the famine had also severely struck the land of Canaan, and Jacob was desperate. He kept Benjamin, his youngest son, by his side, because he was afraid that harm might come to him on the journey. When they arrived in Egypt to buy grain, the 10 sons of Jacob were taken before the all-powerful Joseph. And they knelt down before him. This fulfilled the dream Joseph had had years earlier. They, of course, did not recognize Joseph as the brother they had sold into slavery. Joseph, however, recognized them immediately, but he did not let them know it. He spoke harshly to them and treated them like strangers. He turned his back to them as they pleaded with him to sell them grain. He even accused them of being spies. They denied it vehemently and tried to explain to him who they were, that their aged father Jacob was back in Canaan with their youngest brother, and they desperately needed to buy food. Joseph pretended he did not believe them and threw them into prison. 3 days later, when he felt that they had suffered enough, he went to them and offered them a bargain. "I will put you to a test," he said. "I will sell you the grain, but you must leave one of you here as hostage. Return home and come back with your younger brother, and I shall know you are telling me the truth, and you shall not die." The brothers agreed to do this and argued their predicament among themselves. They did not know that Joseph understood their language, since he had always spoken to them through an interpreter. Reuben said that what they were going through was punishment for what they had done to their brother Joseph so many years ago. "Did I not tell you not to wrong the boy? But you would not listen. Now comes the reckoning for his blood." This was too much for Joseph, and he turned away from his brothers and wept. Then he returned to them and picked out Simeon as a hostage. He allowed them to be given grain, and he sent them on their way. When they got back to Canaan, they told their father what had happened to them in Egypt. He was in despair. In Genesis 42:36, Jacob cries out,
"I am the one you have bereaved of children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more. And now you would take Benjamin. My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he alone is left."
But when the grain they had brought from Egypt ran out, and the famine was still severe in the land, the old patriarch realized he had no choice. He would have to send them back to Egypt for more grain, and he would have to send Benjamin with them. When the brothers arrived in Egypt and once again stood before the mighty Joseph, their reception was entirely different. Joseph was delighted to see Benjamin with them, and he ordered his steward to take them to his house and slaughter an animal, and he would dine with them at noon. The steward took the men to Joseph's great house, and he brought Simeon out of prison to be reunited with them. Joseph joined them at noon and asked them about their father, and paid particular attention to his younger brother Benjamin. They still did not recognize Joseph as their long-lost brother. According to the Bible, they drank and were merry with him, a far cry from the harsh and hostile treatment they had experienced before. Then Joseph commanded his steward to fill their bags with food, as much as they can carry. He also took his own silver cup and told the steward to secretly place it on top of the grain in Benjamin's sack. By morning's light, the brothers were on their way home. They had traveled only a short distance when they were overtaken by Joseph's steward, who accused them of stealing Joseph's silver cup. He challenged the brothers. "Why have you returned evil for good?" Naturally, the brothers were amazed and vehemently denied it. "Why should we do such a thing?" they said. "If it be found with any of us, let him die. Moreover, the rest of us will become your slaves." "So be it," said the steward. "He who has it shall be my slave. The rest of you shall go free." The steward began searching each man's sack, starting with the oldest. The last sack the steward searched was Benjamin's. And there, of course, he found the silver cup. Seeing this, the brothers cried out and tore their clothes in despair. How could they ever explain this to their father, Jacob? They loaded up their donkeys and returned to the city. They stood in fear before the now stern Joseph, who said, "What deed is this that you have done?" Judah stepped forward and pleaded eloquently with Joseph, telling him about his father and his love for Benjamin, the only remaining child of his old age. He ended his plea by asking Joseph to let him stay as his slave and let Benjamin go back to his father. Judah's plea was too much for Joseph. He could not keep up his charade any longer. He cried out and sent all the Egyptians out of the room. and he wept so loudly that all the Egyptians could hear him, and also the household of Pharaoh. The brothers were dismayed at this. But Joseph said, with great compassion and understanding, in Genesis 45:4,
I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God.
When Pharaoh heard that Joseph had been reunited with his brothers, he was very pleased. He said to Joseph, "Tell your brothers to load up their donkeys and go back to the land of Canaan, and get your father and all his household and come to me, and I will give them the best land in Egypt, and they will live off the fat of the land." When they returned home, and Jacob heard the whole story, that his son Joseph was alive and the governor of all Egypt, he was stunned, and at first he didn't believe them. But when he saw all the wagons Joseph had sent to carry them back, he rejoiced and said, "Enough! My son Joseph is still alive. I will go to see him before I die." So Jacob set out for Egypt with 70 members of his household and all their belongings and livestock. They stopped in Beersheba to offer a sacrifice to God, and that night God made Jacob a promise that has become central to the history of the Hebrews. In Genesis 46:2, God says,
Jacob, Jacob, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again.
When Jacob and his large family arrived in Egypt, Joseph presented him to Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and Pharaoh was as good as his word. He instructed Joseph to settle his father and his brothers in the region of Goshen, which is a fertile area in the northeastern part of the Nile Delta, and see that they had food and anything else they needed. Jacob and his people prospered there, and they were fruitful and multiplied, and Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years. During that time, Joseph became even more wealthy and powerful. By trading grain for land and services, he effectively abolished private property and established a kind of feudal system that was very profitable for the pharaohs and for Joseph himself. Then one day, he received the sad news that Jacob was dying.
הנה אביך חולה.
He took his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and went to his father's bedside. Then Jacob blessed Joseph and his 2 boys. Jacob then called all his other sons around him, and he blessed them also.
את רבקה אשתו, ושמה קברתי את לאה.
And then, surrounded by the men after whom the 12 tribes of Israel were named, the patriarch Jacob breathed his last. He was 147 years old. Joseph and Benjamin and all their brothers took their father's body back to the land of Canaan, and they buried him in the cave at Mamre. There at Mamre, Jacob, his father Isaac, and his grandfather Abraham would remain together for eternity. Joseph returned to Egypt, where he had a large family of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He lived to be 110 years old, and when he died, he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt.